All right, this is part 3 of the Kitchen Madonna by Rumer Godden. Where are you going? Asked Mother. To the museum. Mother thought Gregory meant the Geological or the Natural History Museum, where he often went on Saturday mornings. Both were in Kensington, their own part of London. Gregory loved the museums. He made drawings there of stones and crystals, of fossils and skeletons, and brought them back to store in his loft, tracing more drawings out of books, collecting and labeling them. But what will you do with them? Asked Janet, who longed to do something with everything. But Gregory did not answer. He only continued to store away. So much goes into Gregory, said Mother with a sigh to Father. Nothing ever comes out, just the opposite to Janet. No brother and sister could have been more different. Janet was pretty, a well-grown little girl, plump with dimples, lively brown eyes, gold-brown curls. A cherub, said Marta. Gregory, though older, was smaller and pale, with thin legs and knobbled knees and strangely large hands with long fingers. Clever hands, said Mother. His face was small and pale, too, while his big gray eyes were made bigger by dark-rimmed spectacles. When Gregory sat working in his loft, his face knotted with thought, his hair ruffled, his eyes peering through his spectacles. He looked like an old professor. Museums are the natural haunt of old professors, but this morning Gregory did not mean the Natural History Museum nor the Geological. He meant the British Museum. One of the few people Gregory ever spoke to outside the house was the underkeeper in the fossil room at the Natural History Museum, and he had said, "Icons? You'll have to go to the British Museum for those." The British Museum, Gregory told Janet. That's a long way off. He asked Father to help him look it up on the map of London that Tove and Babette had used. The British Museum is in Bloomsbury, near Bloomsbury Square, said Father. Why do you want to know? One day I'll go there, said Gregory. He did not tell Father that the day was this very Saturday. He had worked out the buses they must take. As quite a small boy, 7 or 8, said Gregory. He had taught himself the London bus routes. The museum seemed halfway across London, and we shall have to change buses, he told Janet. The fares will be expensive, but we have plenty of money. Yes, said Janet sadly. When Gregory chose, he could make Janet do anything he wanted, and now he had taken all her pocket money. We have 35 shillings between us, he said, which is more than I hoped, 35 shillings. Then we have 3p of mine and 9 pennies of yours, he added. You can keep your pennies. But I want to keep my shillings, protested Janet. I'm saving for a pony. You mustn't be selfish, said Gregory, who was always scolded for being selfish. If you told Mother, she would buy Marta an icon, argued Janet. You know she would. Why can't we tell her? You know why. It was only Marta who made us promise. She isn't only Marta. On that afternoon, when Gregory had patted her, Marta had lifted her head, put back her hair, sniffed loudly, and dried her tears on her napkin. More than 22 years, said Marta. 22 years I away from my home, and I never think of it. Now, it is talking to children, said Marta. I not talk so much. It bad. And she said, you must give me deep promise. She meant solemn. Your mother's so good to me, said Marta. Your father give me so much money. Marta not ungrateful. The R rolled indignantly at the very idea. Never, 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 I should die, said Marta with vehemence, if they think that. You, kind boy, she said to Gregory. Perhaps one day, God, he send Marta a picture. But Gregory had made up his mind. God won't give her that picture, nor Mother, nor Father. I shall, he said. Gregory was right. The bus was horribly expensive, even though, being under 14, they were half fares. It was a long, long way, and what time shall we get back? Asked Janet. We haven't got there yet, said Gregory, but he was beginning to realize that a Saturday morning was not time enough. Even when they reached the museum, it would take time to find the icons. Gregory knew how big the natural history and geological museums were. The British Museum must be even bigger. Enormous, thought Gregory. What time can we get back? He wondered. When they left the bus, even with the map on which Father had shown him the way, they took a wrong turning and had to ask. Twice, said Janet. She said it feelingly because Gregory made her ask. He would never speak to anyone if he could help it. But when at last they arrived at the museum with its great courtyard and climbed the stone steps to the pillared entrance and were in the echoing hall, she refused to ask. Museums were Gregory's territory, and she put herself out of the way behind a huge marble statue while Gregory went up to the uniformed man at the desk. Janet would have said, "Please, where's the icon room?" But when Gregory was forced to speak, he did it so clearly and grandly. "Where do you keep your icons?" he asked. "Are those icons?" asked Janet. After a long time of wandering through rooms and galleries, up flights of stone stairs, a keeper had shown them some glass cases in a corner of a large room. "Are those icons?" "I suppose so," said Gregory. There was a card in one case lettered, "Icon panel, 12.5 inches, late 16th century, Moscow school." There were other cards, but the icons were not in the least like Marta's description. To the children's eyes, they were rather dull and angular paintings on thick wood, some large and some small, painted and burnished with gold. There were several of the Madonna and Child, what Janet called Jesus Marys. There was Christ on the cross, or his head against golden rays, while some had saints in long robes. The backgrounds of some were gorgeous, red gold, the color of sunsets, and the robes and sandals and embroideries were painted in fine detail. Some of the colors glowed, but most were smoky, Janet said with distaste. One was silvered all over, just showing the faces and hands. One small Madonna had a cloak and a robe of turquoise enamel. "But where is the velvet?" asked Janet. "Where are the rubies and pearls? Where is the amber?" When Janet was disappointed, her voice rang out, and a gentleman who was studying a case of miniature jade bottles through an eyeglass looked up. He had glanced at the children once or twice, perhaps amused at the way Gregory stood in front of each icon, gazing at it, his nose almost pressed to the glass. Now the gentleman came over to them. "Don't you think they're beautiful?" he asked. "No," said Janet, and she said again, "Where are the jewels?" "You mean the clothes and halos are not decorated in silver or gold?" he asked. "Yes, sir," said Gregory, as formally as if he were at school. "They're nearly all plain painting," complained Janet, "and why are they so dark?" "Well, when these paintings were finished," said the gentleman, "they were given a coating of oil, and that absorbs dust and incense. These are old icons, early Greek and Russian. After centuries of worship, naturally the paintings grew dark, but that adds to their interest." Janet did not think so. "The bright colors are there underneath," the gentleman assured her, and he said seriously, "An icon is more than a painting. It is meant to be a link between earth and heaven, a window opening onto sacred things. That's how people look at them." Gregory thought he understood. That was how Marta's had felt to her. "Come and look here," said the gentleman, and he led the children to a special case. "Our Lady of Konev," he said. "She has been loved for more than 400 years. Look at her embroidered cloak." "But it isn't embroidered," said Janet. "That's just it." "You don't want paintings to be ornamented, young lady." The gentleman sounded severe. "We do want them to be ornamented," said Janet, so flatly that Gregory had to mouth to her, "You're being rude." "I'm not. He is," Janet mouthed back. "Trying to make us like what we don't like," she muttered, interfering. But Gregory was interested in what the gentleman had said about the window onto sacred things, and ashamed of Janet, he said, "You see, it was a jeweled icon we were looking for, sir." "I don't think many were jeweled," said the gentleman. "Marta said they were," said Janet. "Some were enameled. Fabergé, for instance, did a fine example." "Fabergé?" asked Gregory. "He was a famous jeweler. His icon is exquisite." "Where could we see it?" "I don't think you could. It belongs to the Duke of Norfolk, but there may be others. I should ask a jeweler if I were you." "A jeweler?" "Yes, Rostov's, off Regent Street and Panton Place, on the right side as you go up from Piccadilly. Specialized in icons," said the gentleman. "They might help you, if you must have ornamentation." "We must," said Janet. And Gregory mouthed again, "Shut up." But to the gentleman, he said politely, "Please, sir, could you write that name down?" The gentleman took out a silver pencil and a card and wrote on it and gave it to Gregory. It seemed as if he would make one more attempt to persuade them of the beauty of the old icons, but Gregory hastily said, "Thank you," while Janet slipped behind the cases. "For goodness sake," said Gregory as they scurried down the gallery, "do you have to be so rude?" "I wasn't rude." "You were," and they started to bicker. "My legs ache," said Janet on the stairs. And in the hall she rebelled. "I won't go to that jeweler's now. I'm tired and I'm hungry. I want to go home." "Little softy," said Gregory. "I'm not a softy." "Pestering nuisance." "I'm not a nuisance. You are." The quarrel was settled for them as a clock chimed twice. 2 o'clock, it can't be. But it was, and they looked at one another in consternation. My goodness, what will Mother say? Asked Janet. Extremely, extremely naughty, said Mother. Gregory and Janet had not arrived home until 4 o'clock. In his worry, Gregory had got them onto a bus going the wrong way, which nearly doubled the journey, and then they had had a long wait at the bus stop until the right bus came along. Naughty, deceitful, and thoughtless, said Mother. Marta was half out of her mind with worry when you didn't come back for lunch. I had a rush of work at the office and had to leave it when she telephoned me there. You know perfectly well you're not allowed to go off without saying where you're going. Mother was really angry. Gregory's pocket money was stopped for 2 weeks, and they were both sent to bed. I don't care, said Janet. My legs still ache. Gregory did not care either. He had the card and the address the gentleman had written. Rostov, Court Jewelers, 9 Panton Place, Regent Street. Court Jewelers. Even the words seemed to glitter. I expect they make crowns, he told Janet, and he conned over the words the gentleman had said. Like an elephant, Gregory did not forget things, and like a parrot, he could remember what people said word by word. If he is interested, said Mother. He was deeply interested now. Fabergé did a fine example. He repeated that over and over again. Fabergé did a fine example. I shall go to Rostov's next Saturday, he told Janet before he fell asleep. In the morning, though, Father gave Gregory a good talking to. London is a big city, he said, bigger than you think, and easy to get lost in. You must keep to the part you know. Our square, these streets, the Crescent, the High Street, the gardens, and the park. 9 and 7 years old is too young to go exploring. It's not fair to Marta, who is responsible for you, and you, as the elder, are responsible for Janet. There is to be no more going off on your own. Are you listening, Gregory? Father must have caught a faraway look on Gregory's face. Our square, the streets around it, and the park. Nowhere else, Gregory. Do you hear me? Asked Father sharply. Yes, Father, Gregory had heard and wished he had not. When he came out of Father's room, he looked thoughtful and unhappy. Then he sighed and said, I'm afraid I shall have to be disobedient. Why? Asked Janet. And Gregory made one of his old-fashioned remarks. There is no other course open to me. But you needn't be, he said, and when Saturday came, he told Janet to stay with Marta. Why? Because I'm going to get into trouble. If you get into trouble, I don't see why I shouldn't, said Janet, and to all Gregory's arguments, she would only say, I'm coming. They found Rostov's. It was not really far on a number 14 bus. They got off at Piccadilly and walked up Regent Street until Gregory caught sight of a sign that said Panton Place. Rostov's was on the corner, a big shop with a facade that seemed to be made of dark gray marble. The windows were small, set deep in the wall, lined with cream yellow velvet and laced with crisscross gilt bars, so that no one can smash them, said Gregory, impressed. Sapphires, emeralds, diamonds, he breathed, gazing at the windows. And though it had begun to rain, he stayed a long time gloating over the brooches and necklaces and rings. They haven't any price on them, said Janet. That's queer. There was no sign of an icon. Do you think they really sell them? She asked. The museum gentleman said so, said Gregory. He said they specialized. But when he came to the shop door, Gregory quailed. It was not like the door of any of the shops in their familiar high street, set open or swinging cheerfully to and fro, nor were there people going in and out. No women with shopping bags or baskets on wheels or babies and perambulators. The door was of plate glass with a crest and firmly shut. It was a minute or two before Gregory gathered up enough courage to push it open. Then he and Janet jumped. Sitting on a stool just inside was a man in uniform. He was a doorman, a kind of keeper guard, Gregory told Janet afterwards. A guard, as if they didn't want people to come in, said Janet. It seemed to her a very queer shop. The doorman got up as they came hesitatingly in. What do you want, son? Gregory did not answer. With Janet pressed close beside him, he stood on a deep crimson carpet. Gregory blinked in the brilliance of light. The shop seemed to spread away on all sides, wall after wall lined with lit cases, glass counters lit too, and all filled with sparkling things. Several men in dark suits, their hair sleek and shining in the light, stood behind the counters. One was talking to a lady. She seemed the only customer in the shop. The rest were simply standing. It was so quiet that above the murmur of the ladies' and gentlemen's voices, the children could hear clocks ticking, innumerable clocks. The shop and the quiet seemed vast. "Let's go," whispered Janet, but now Gregory was not afraid. This was Rostov's, just as he had dreamed. The doorman, when he came to look at him, was not very different from the keepers in the museum, and Gregory did not like being called son. He stood his ground. "What do you two want?" asked the man again. "We want," said Gregory, "to see the owner of this shop." His voice, in its clearness and grandeur, reached all around the room, even to where an older man with white hair was writing at a desk at the back. He looked up. "The owner, eh?" The big doorman looked down at Gregory with an amusement that nettled him. "Yes, the owner or one of his men." And Gregory, though Janet jibbed like a frightened little calf, walked up to a counter. Janet followed and stood by the glass case, her eyes growing rounder as she looked at the things inside. When she pressed the glass case with her fingers, it was warm. She was so surprised. She whispered, "Greg, the glass is hot." "Yes?" asked the young man behind the counter. "Yes?" Gregory was going to speak when Janet, being Janet, spoiled everything. She looked up at the young man and asked in an odd voice, "Do you sell crowns?" "But you said they might," whispered Janet as Gregory's elbow drove sharply into her ribs. "You said it." "I know I did, but not here." A ripple of laughter had run around the room among the men. Then the young man leaned forward and spoke to Janet in the voice grown people use when they speak to little children. Very little children, thought Gregory, scalding. "Crowns? Why, yes, for princesses and fairy queens." Janet's pink face went pinker, but Gregory turned scarlet and then white, which meant he had lost his temper. "We didn't come here to be laughed at," he said. Gregory was not 4 feet tall, but there was dignity in his anger and the way he spoke, and the white-haired man got up from his desk and joined the young man behind the counter. "That will do, Mr. Needham," he said, and he asked Gregory, "What did you come for?" There was not a hint of laughter in his voice. "I was told," said Gregory, still haughty, "that you sell icons." "We do, but what kind of icons are you interested in?" "Not Greek or Russian," said Gregory. "At least not early Greek or Russian. Later, ornamented icons," said Gregory. And he asked, "Have you any examples of Fabergé?" "Fabergé?" The man's eyebrows went up. He exchanged glances with Mr. Needham, who openly stared. Then, "We haven't a Fabergé, I'm sorry to say," said the older man, and ordering Mr. Needham, as Gregory would have ordered Janet, he said, "Show the young gentleman what we have." Mr. Needham led the way across the room and opened a glass wall case. There the icons were. After the museum, the children recognized them instantly, though most were brighter, their colors more clear. 3 on the top shelf were painted of Madonnas and saints. One had baby angels looking out of clouds, another gold doors that made it like a small shrine. Some were dim, but alone on one shelf was an icon of the mother and child that riveted Gregory's attention at once. "Look," he whispered to Janet, "look." The mother had a gold crown with, behind it, a circle of stars. The baby, nestling against her, had a smaller crown. The cloak was blue and studded with silver, and in her hand the mother held a silver ball banded with pinhead red stones. "It's an orb," Gregory whispered to Janet. "You remember when Father took us to see the crown jewels? We saw the Queen's orb." "Are the stones rubies?" whispered Janet. She was sure they were rubies, but garnets most likely, said Gregory. They gazed and gazed until Gregory said aloud, "That's the one," and told Mr. Needham, "I should like to look at that icon, please." "You can look at it on the shelf," said Mr. Needham. "I need to look at it close," said Gregory. Once again, "Mr. Needham," said the older man, and reluctantly Mr. Needham spread a square of black velvet on the nearest counter, lifted out the icon, and laid it in front of Gregory. Janet crowded up to see, but Mr. Needham kept his hands on each side of it as if he were afraid the children might touch it. Gregory hardly saw the hands. His eyes were all for the icon, searching out every detail. "It hasn't many jewels," said Janet. "Would Marta like it?" "Who could help liking it?" Gregory answered, almost absently. So this was what an icon could be like. His eyes went from it to the one with the angels in the clouds, the one with the gold doors. None was as beautiful. "This is the one," said Gregory. How was he to know that Janet, the little silly, would take that as being settled? Before he could stop her, she had seized his purse out of his hand. "We have spent a lot on buses," she told Mr. Needham, "but we'll have more than 30 shillings left. Does this icon cost more than that?" "It costs 438 guineas, said Mr. Needham, and again that ripple of laughter ran around the shop. Gregory did not know how he got outside. He only remembered that there was a buzzing in his ears as he dragged Janet across the crimson carpet, and that the shop and its lights seemed to swim around him. "Wait a minute, boy," he heard the older man say, and the doorman laid a hand on Gregory's shoulder, but Gregory shook him off, wrenched open the door, pulled Janet through it, and slammed it shut. In the street, he walked so fast he did not look where he was going, and Janet had to trot to keep up with him. "Idiot, silly idiot," said Gregory, but Janet had no idea what she had done. Her face looked bewildered as she trotted, the rain wetting her hair. She held the purse out toward him. He took it and thrust it out of sight. 30 shillings. No wonder they had laughed. But it wasn't Janet's fault, he thought. It was mine for going into a shop like that. How could I have been so silly?